Ribbit. Zach here from Gravel by California in Frogtown, ready to lead our Send It urban adventure. The east side is definitely one of my most favorite places to ride because of its turn-of-the-century development with turn-of-the-century technology, making this on a much more human scale with so many niches and open spaces to explore. I've always wanted to do this, but today also happens to be Arroyo Fest where they're closing down the 110, so hey Aretha, we're going riding on a freeway. So many pockets to explore, not to mention the steepest street in Los Angeles, which of course I do if I wasn't filming so much. Let's roll. It was a golden morning to ride, starting just one arroyo over, and for cyclists, only coffee can make it more perfect. Meeting up at stalwart La Colombe, that's among a number of establishments that have popped up thanks to the popularity of the LA River Path, as our route clocked in at just under 27 miles with a lot of landmarks built in. While the LA River stretches 50 miles from Canoga Park to Long Beach, the Elysian Valley has the second longest stretch of path at 7 miles, with some significant infrastructure added to this section the last decade, most recently with the Taylor Yard Bridge constructed in 2021, making a connection with the Cypress Park community. But wayfinding on a bike gets messy as you approach the confluence with the Arroyo Seco, with the path ending under the divergence of freeways, spanning us on this new bridge towards Figueroa Street, as a cadre of cyclists hinted at the numbers to come, wiggling our way onto Avenue 26, that was also part of the Arroyo Fest festivities, serving as the finish line for the accompanying 10K, but our group had a different path heading onto the 110, making our way onto the northbound side, that was reserved for those just out for wheeling, no matter what shape or size. And comparing the numbers from this event 20 years earlier, the attendance was clearly exponential in comparison, thanks to local mobility advocacy group Active SGV that has experience in hosting open streets events. But this one is unique, riding on the first freeway that was ever built, noticing how bad the surface is for driving, let alone biking. Although there's probably been some updating since 1940, but definitely not on these off-ramps that are only safe at cycling speeds. That makes this a far more enjoyable experience. At least that was the sense I was getting, except when I tried recording my own audio. The gravel pack made it all the way out from Riverside, as this was a species-inclusive event, and really felt like everyone you knew was out there, even catching our friends from Path Less Pedaled making their way to Spain.
Gravel by California right there.
Hey, how's it going, Russ? Crossing underneath the Santa Fe Bridge brought an added layer of history. Built in 1896, now in service for Metro Rail, but our traffic down below kept increasing to the point that it was probably the most people to use this freeway at once. So it was good timing that our off-ramp was coming off, being the first time I've ever had to make an announcement like this. As hitting the streets of South Pasadena, it was hard to fathom we had even more space than the 110, with the Open Streets Festival continuing on Mission Ave, and it felt odd seeing so few riders coming the other way, but my guess that crowds were forming for my autograph might be untrue, or maybe a passing train had something to do with it, as it was quite a feat the group stuck together around this mosh pit of cyclists. We still had plenty of touring ahead of us, and now away from Arroyo Fest, you could see we had a pretty big group, even with some small bikes. But we were headed onto some wider pastures onto Huntington Drive, named after the railroad magnate who once had his red car trolleys rolled down the street that not only had a line here stretching through El Sereno, but in 1911 had the longest mileage of track in the world, stretching from the beach to even San Bernardino and Riverside counties, as now all the tracks have been upended, leaving an inordinate amount of space for cars, while many of the aligning businesses have been left bunched at a human scale. We were making our way towards our first dirt segment on Eastern Ave, that was named for being a specific LA border. But moving off to the side streets, we hit our first climb of the day, albeit short, but enough to get us out of the saddle with a speedy downhill following that made some miss the entrance to Ascot Hills Park, entering onto some pure Los Angeles soil that was more pitchy than technical, even though it's 8% for 1 kilometer. But elevation does have its privileges, unmistakably having downtown LA in our view, noticing the number of hills that surround, with open space on top from all angles, meaning it's a fantastic venue to take a group shot. Getting out of Ascot Hills was a bit trickier, exiting out of the northwest corner, as not only the side streets were super narrow, but also barely meeting the definition of street, which is actually good news for gravel, which is probably the most efficient way of passage, wiggling our way down, assuming we'd eventually return to pavement, with most of the group intact, except for a couple of flats, as we continued on Monterey, where our next set of ascents were nearby, tied to our foray into Ernest Debs Park, where the longest climb inside was moderately graded, but soon forgotten after getting off the road onto this quarter-mile path, treating us to this unfriendly 15% grade, where this tiny lake would seem like a proper punctuation, except one last feisty pitch. That's an efficient climb if you're looking to be unfriended, but we could only ascend into the atmosphere so far, getting our fastest piece of downhill dirt with an ever-changing perspective, taking this large curve around Montesino Heights. And with this route only being 10% dirt, I encourage people to ride thinner tires, although this was one section we could call underbiking, but knowing LA conditions, we were playing with house money, as we could use more parks like this. Attitudes were still in the positive sphere, as this ride wasn't bugging anyone yet, passing over the 110, where the Arroyo Fest was just letting up, leading us into the Highland Park neighborhood, where our next chapter would not be so quaint, heading to a dead end that was also our main attraction in Eldred Street, that at 33.3% ranks as the 4th steepest in the US. While there was no requirement for the group to climb, I knew the temptation would be too strong, and I figured Mike from Upland would be the first to give it a go, where the success rate could only go down from there, seeing I'd likely bring it down to the Mendoza line, with not getting the downhill start being too much of a factor, as momentum tends to get sucked up as Eldred transitions to concrete. But one of the keys is staying in the center channel that's not as exposed to cracks like most of Eldred's surface, although maintaining a straight line gets tougher at the top, not to mention avoiding others going down, meaning the for sale signs aren't that surprising, as the top was getting hairy, and I don't think the extra press coverage helped, just trying to avoid the cracks, and not being able to shift into my bottom gear, which made me feel like I was so close, yet ultimately so far. So overall, it was an impressive showing, because if you build it, they will come, but also everyone had to come down, which can feel trickier than going up, as thankfully there weren't any nosedives on our injury report. We were headed back toward the river through Mount Washington, that has a historic culture of its own, including the Southwest Museum, built in 1914, that proved we were among some great ones, returning back through the Confluence Circle, this time passing the long-shuttered Lincoln Heights Jail, built in 1927, as we crossed over the LA River on Broadway and into the oldest park in the city, in Elysian Park, that now has the 110 cutting through it in more years than not, with the park perfectly positioned to see the hills behind and the remaining group strung out, as we had one remaining piece of dirt left that was a short and efficient shortcut, and no mind was paid to the climbing at this point, coming across one of the best views of Los Angeles, overlooking downtown and Dodger Stadium, that it's a good place for even vendors to set up, as there's reasons to hang out for a while. Peaks lead to valleys. And while these palm trees aren't indigenous to anywhere near, they do beautifully frame our way out, with our last look towards Echo Park, whipping for one last descent down Stadium Way, taking us efficiently into Elysian Valley, where we didn't quite end where we started, finishing out at Frogtown Brewery on Gilroy, that I shouldn't have to generally explain what's on the menu, although this green beer looked like it belonged in a Harry Potter movie, and this peanut butter more in a Reese's, causing a lot of eyebrows to shift, as GBCers are always prepared for fun from all angles. I don't think that there's a percentage of dirt that makes something officially a gravel ride. Really, this was about the experience, and that's what biking's all about. Being able to explore and discover, and using a bike as a tool to do it on a more human scale. You know, we could have turned this east side ride to like 90 miles and still could have kept on going. So, will Gravel Bike California ever do a ride like this again? You bet. Hey, if you want a better outro, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or support us on Patreon or go to our shop so we can bring you more. And stay dirt.